Cuba La Raza Standards. This is Flo once again with another topic that I consider very, very important for our community in regards to history, in regards to identity. This one to me was very, very important, like I said, simply because, again, it falls in line with the conquest and some things that are not really told in our history, right? Again, we're always told that the Spanish came into the Americas and just completely destroyed everything and had no resistance whatsoever, right? But this specific story here is something that challenges that, right? And it has to do with the Chichimeca resistance, Chichimeca Wars that took place for about 40 years. Okay, so the Chichimeca are a group of people from different groups. You have the Guatachiles, you have the Pames, you have the Guamares and Zacatecos, right? You have a number of different groups that are considered Chichimeca, right? And these specific groups lived in the northern part of, or more central part of Mexico. So, for example, you have San Luis Potosí, Querétaro, Guanajuato, and Zacatecas. And this specific group of natives challenged the Spanish and had a lot of success, right? So when the Spanish discovered silver in what is now Zacatecas, they began to encroach and they began to try to take over the area, just like other areas. The problem was the terrain. It was not as easy to conquer like it was in other parts of Mexico. And immediately, the Chichimeca people began to challenge them, right? When the Spanish began to just take over without consent, as they had done for the last, 20, 30 years. So off the bat, they were met with resistance. And the difference between the other conquests that the Spanish had was that they were facing a semi-nomadic people. And again, the terrain made it difficult for them to actually try to beat them, right? And the Chichimeca were also very, very fierce warriors. They were known as the best bow and arrow warriors in all of Mesoamerica, according to other Spaniards and other natives as well, right? So this helped out, again. And also because they knew the terrain and the Spanish did not, they had an advantage over the Spanish, okay? And because the Spanish were so accustomed to getting goods from other parts of New Spain, the Chichimeca understood that. So what they would do is they would raid these carts full of goods, and they would destroy them and kill the people that were going to supply them. So essentially what they ended up doing is cut the supplies, and the Spanish would suffer from that, right? Not only were they attacking the carts, but they were also began to attack the settlements that were near these roads, and the Spanish were not able to counter that. Again, because the Chichimeca knew the terrain, they were fierce warriors. The Spanish had native allies like the Purepecha and the Mexica and other natives, and even they were afraid of the Chichimeca because of their war tactics, right? They were not attacking like other natives. They would basically do a lot of attacking, and then they would retreat. So it wasn't head-on combat. It was more ambushes. And they would also attack the livestock, the cattle, the horses. And that made it even more difficult for the Spanish to defeat them because they were so accustomed to being on horses and fighting them on horses that when they did not have their horses, they struggled, right? And then also the bow and arrow that the Chichimeca possessed was specifically designed to penetrate the Spanish armor, which was even more effective, right? And this continued for a very, very long time. So what the Spanish ended up doing is they tried to push back more and obviously try to suppress this, but they had no luck. From 1575 to about 1585, the Spanish lost about 4,000 men and also native allies. So they just had no luck. They could not defeat the Chichimeca. The Chichimeca kept pushing back. And what angered the Chichimeca more was that every time that the Spanish would defeat the Chichimeca, in battle or whatever, they would take the kids and the women, obviously to do horrible things to them. So that only motivated them to attack them even more. And it wasn't until the late, 1780s that the Spanish decided to try a different approach. And this was actually something that not the Spanish soldiers tried to use, but actually churchmen, right? You had a specific mestizo captain that was of Chichimeca descent and Spanish descent. His name was Miguel Caldera. And he was one of the advocates of using this different approach, right? Buying peace, because the blood and fire approach did not work for the Chichimeca like it did with other native peoples, native groups. Essentially, what ended up happening is that once they tried this approach, they began to buy land off the Chichimeca, buy peace, like they said. And one of the trade-offs was that they would have to convert to Catholicism. And a lot of them did, not by force, but because the Tlaxcala natives that were allies of the Spanish moved into the regions and basically said, look, try this out, right? It worked to some extent. Some natives, took it upon themselves to convert. Some still did not, obviously. But the majority of the population eventually did convert into Catholicism and into Hispanic culture. And that's why today you have Chichimeca who are close to being pure blood, I guess if you want to call it that, who are mainly, who still practice these things, right? But again, you have very, very small groups of Chichimeca today that still practice their old beliefs because they were not defeated. The Spanish gave in to this. And again, the only way they were able to conquer them, I guess if you want to call it that, is by having them assimilate. And this thing was so effective that the Spanish began to reconsider how they approach other native, especially semi-nomadic or nomadic groups, because they understood that it was a lot harder to defeat these people because, one, they did not live in one specific place. They knew the terrain. They were accustomed to living off very, very little things. So the Spanish began to try this buy peace or assimilation method for other natives they encountered up north. And, I wanted to share that because, again, the conquest was not as simple as the sword or forcing people to do stuff. They had to negotiate many times, the Spanish, because if it did not negotiate, they would not be successful. This war lasted about 40 years, right? They had the weapons, they had the horses, they had even native allies. But in this case, I guess, the diseases were not as effective to the natives. And I would say that the Chichimeca won the war, but obviously they did assimilate, and that contributed to them not, I guess, full-on Chichimeca, if you want to call it that. But again, some of them still practice their culture. That's all I wanted to say today about this. Again, look it up. I have the links and the books in the sources description section. On that note, this is Flo. Rasa stand. Take a stand to understand. Peace.
Like a cobra and strike you like a rattlesnake. I expose the fake. Nico, I like the body, let me demonstrate. I speak like an eagle so eloquently. You dumb down the masses, what can't you see? That you're not an artist, but an entertainer. What for one of my shit? I'm not a hater. Out of my lungs, I accept what I can fire. You to see the band, so I call you a liar.
I won't stop cause I'm a
Kid, kill the microphone, kid, kill the microphone.
I won't stop cause I'm a